One of the scenes that I wanted to create for just dramatic purposes involved a rescue in this cave. And so there's one person who knows it better than anyone else, but we have a cave rescue organized in just the way you were talking about earlier, with commission putting together combination of local first responders and then caving experts. How willing would you be to bring in that person with local knowledge, even if you hadn't worked with them on a rescue and you didn't have trust in their general approach in a cave?
Oh, it happens all the time. I have put a helmet and light and coveralls on a paramedic and dragged him into the cave and said, here's the patient, and they will never leave that patient because they have no idea what they're doing.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, that's happened frequently. Now, just like a regular civilian who say, it's a cave in their backyard, probably not.
Okay.
But there have been times where a group has come out of a cave and said, my buddy got injured, and we have no idea where they are in the cave. We've had them take us back into the cave to show us where the person might be. And especially in areas where there's lots and lots of caves, like around Buckner Cave, within an hour hike, you can be in a couple hundred different caves.
Yeah.
And so we may have somebody who's, we get this a lot with in the rural areas, their coonhound went into a cave, got stuck in somewhere. It could be out in the middle of the woods somewhere. We have no idea where they are. Right. Well, they have to show us where that is, and then they may be there to help us, lure the hound out. So there's lots of times where we would use those kind of civilian resources or inexperienced people. I had the director of the local ambulance service once bring a full defibrillation kit in on a full rescue that we had. So it was one of those, a $10,000 piece of equipment, and he's dragging it into the cave with us, and he'd never been in a cave before.
Mm-hmm. What you touched on some of these elements earlier with regard to people going in with a couple flashlights, thinking they're just going to be an out, they get lost, they run out of light. Is that the most common circumstance, and what other incidents lead to high numbers of rescue?
The biggest thing that we have is the lost and out of light. Okay, like I said, that's about 9 out of 10 rescues. Now the statistics on that are hard to count because, like in a cave like Buckner, on a weekend, people who are unauthorized to go in here, who sneak in, well, there's a good chance that somebody on that weekend will come along and find them again. Right. And there's another cave down in Georgia called Pettyjohn's, which is very similar to that. It's so well traveled that a lot of those rescues occur that we never even know about. But even with what we do know about, we figure that it's at least 9 out of 10.
It's still by far the dominant.
Yeah. The next thing that tends to kill people the most is drowning. And caves tend to be nature's storm sewers. And so you think, okay, you go into a cave, the rainstorm hits, and now they drown, which that does happen. But actually what tends to happen is you get caves that are completely underwater, and open water divers, sport divers, go in without proper training, and they drown. So it's still a caving death, but it's not what we tend to think of as a caving death.
Right.
And then the next most common thing is people who are on rope who have a problem. Two of the 4 fatalities that I've worked in cave have been some people who were on rope and got into a waterfall and ended up getting hypothermia and other medical issues that happened as complications to that, and they died as a result. So it goes from almost no problem at all to death.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I'm deliberately leaving out the middle there, because I'm an emergency medical technician, and in EMS we have something that we call the golden hour, which means that if a patient can survive that first hour, they will probably survive a lot longer.
Right.
So they're going to die in that first hour, or they're going to survive. Well, there have only been a very few rescues where somebody was so injured that time was of a critical essence, or like really advanced care was a critical problem. Most of the rescues that we do are relatively simple. They can't get themselves out because they dislocated a shoulder, so they have to go through a lot of crawling. They broke a leg or something like that where they can't get themselves out. But on the grand scheme of things, it's a relatively minor problem.
Right.
We do have kind of a rule of thumb, though. Inexperienced cavers tend to make the easiest rescues because they don't go very far into systems. They don't go into complicated systems. They're not skilled enough to go there.
Sure.
If a caver gets injured, it's a bad day. Not only because it's one of us, but they're probably somewhere in the way back in the middle of nowhere that nobody can get to, but maybe 5 people in the world.
Yeah. At that point, is the biggest risk factor hypothermia?
Multiple risk factors. In our area, hypothermia is going to accompany every single problem, whether it's a lost and out of light, whether it's an injury. It's just the cave temperatures typically around the country are in the upper 40s to the lower 60s. And in our area, it's right in the middle of that. It's right about 55 degrees. And so you sit down for a couple of hours without moving, and you're going to start getting cold. Yeah. Within 4 or 5 hours, you're starting to develop hypothermia. Yeah. So, and if you add an injury on top of that, it happens even faster.
For people who are interested in either a novice or a total beginner, who are interested in getting into caving and seeing the world, but don't have anyone they know personally to reach out to guide them through, what resources would you point to as here is where you should start?
Well, certainly the NSS's, the National Speleological Society's website, caves.org. Pretty easy to remember, caves.org. There is a wealth of resources there. We have, not only are there contact lists for the local caving organizations near you, and there's a caving organization somewhere within an hour drive of almost anybody in the country, with maybe a few exceptions way out west where it's 2 or 3 hours drive just to get to the nearest town. But there's also things like the Guide to Responsible Caving. It's a free PDF that you can download that basically shows you how to start caving. The equipment that you need, the considerations that you have to have, and then of course, always finding somebody who will take you under their wing is the best bet, because that's the safest way to do it.
Yeah, and it's, in my experience, it has been a really generous community.
Oh, we love new people. Yeah, because I need the guys who are going to carry the equipment for me when I go surveying or when I go digging open a new cave. I need the new blood in there, literally the new blood, to help us do it. Yeah. And it's the same thing with cave rescue. We're always looking for new people who are really interested in that aspect of it, because there's only a very few of us across the entire country. The NCRC only has about 60 instructors in the entire United States. And as an example, when I was trying to put together a team to go down to Peru, between people being able to take off work or have their passport or whatever, I was only able to get about 15 people to do a very technically challenging cave rescue in another part of the world.
Well, I found it to be an extremely welcoming community, and so that's what I would stress to anybody who I've talked to about caving. It's reach out to someone local, and odds are you're going to find somebody who is going to be helpful. Final question: have you ever run into the lost and out of light scenario in which a caver managed to get out by himself or herself?
A caver doesn't get lost and out of light. They may get lost occasionally, or as Mark Twain said it best, they weren't lost, but it might confuse for a few days. But there have been a very few situations where we've been called to, say, Buckner or one of the caves that people commonly get lost in, and they weren't lost quite long enough. As a matter of fact, our last call for a search out of this cave, it was only 3 or 4 hours overdue, and in this cave that's pretty common. Right. However, somebody on the surface panicked, and so once they called 911, we have to respond. So we came down and we did everything we could to kind of let a little bit more time go by, because we didn't have a report of any type of injury and they weren't that long overdue. Right. And so, sure enough, about the time I got down in the entrance room here, they were coming out the crawlway that comes into the entrance room.
And they were coming out.
And they were coming out under their own power. They had gotten lost. And it took 3 or 4 hours for them to kind of figure their own way back out. Now, most people, virtually everybody who gets out of light in a cave, unless they're within a very short distance of daylight, is not finding their own way out.
Yep. I said last question, but I lied. So I've got one more. People have been throwing this at me for about the last 2 years now. Why is it that cavers do not like to be referred to as spelunkers?
It is rooted deep in history. When caving as an activity first started, it was actually referred to as spelunking. Mm-hmm. And spelunking is kind of a modification of the scientific name for caving, which is speleology. Right. But it took on negative connotations when the general public discovered the term, and everybody wanted to go spelunking. Right. And there is a very big difference between people who are part of the caving community, or even if they're not part of the community, but they take more of a serious role to it. They prepare, they have the proper equipment, they have respect for the environment that they're going into, versus the people who, they just want to go and find a cool place to drink beer on Saturday afternoon. Right. And so cavers do not want to be associated with that. Mm-hmm. So in the 70s especially, it really became a pejorative term. As a matter of fact, when I first started caving, I started caving with the IU Spelunking Club.
Right, sure.
And then in the mid-'80s, we changed the name to the IU Caving Club.
I've had that question numerous times, and I said, I'm not sure. I just know that when I meet a caver, they're a caver. That's period, and they're going caving. So.
And I don't personally get offended if somebody in the general public calls me a spelunker. I mean, I will use the term caver to them, and I may gently correct them. If they ask why, I'll explain why. But I mean, it's common. Anything you do, and anything that you do anywhere, people, once they learn a term, will want to use it because they want to show that they kind of understand a little bit.
Right. Well, once again, I want to thank you for the help you provided me on the book, but also just as somebody who spent some time underground in this area, thank you for what you do with training first responders and then your own efforts on rescue, because it definitely means a lot to anybody who goes underground and people who have loved ones going underground to know that there is that sort of skilled team waiting to help if need be. So thank you for that.
So one thing I'd like to add, a little wrap up
Sure,
that I
of
always
course.
give to my students. The caving community is the only sport activity that by and large rescues its own. Even rock climbing has a lot of government support.
Yeah. You're not bringing any helicopters down.
No, we're not bringing any helicopters in, and the government agency, whichever agency it is, may help, and they of course have the authority to do the rescue, but the cave rescues cost the taxpayers virtually nothing because we do it out of our own pockets.
Right. That's an excellent point. Well, thank you so much again.
You're welcome.
For time and for everything.